Hello, Senator.
Hello.
So when you took office a few years ago, I think it's safe to say the political landscape was a little different.
Yes, yes.
So what I want to know is now with the Trump administration in place, how much reform is really possible in this area?
I think it remains to be seen. And, Baldwin, at the end of his great book, Fire Next Time, has this saying where he goes, I know what I'm asking you is impossible, but the impossible is the least we can demand because people are emboldened by the spectacle of human history and Negro history in particular, American Negro history in particular, because it's a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible. And so the landscape looks horrible to me, and we don't see an appetite for making these kind of changes, and we have critical folks that blocked the legislation under President Obama that we got out of committee on the floor, and often using tactics that are akin to sort of Willie Horton, like, are we going to let people out of prison? I heard that in the committee vote that we just had on the pieces of legislation that we pushed forward. So, but I still think anything is possible if we can raise enough consciousness in our country to foment movement. This Parkland shooting is an example of when the consciousness of our country gets pricked, the shift of what's possible happens. And so I'm really hopeful that this issue, which is gaining bipartisan traction, which is more and more people are beginning to realize, I think that we can shift the realm of what's possible if we continue at it. I don't care who's president of the United States.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about that bipartisan traction. So as was mentioned in the last panel, you've had some bipartisan success, Mike Lee, Chuck Grassley. Are you seeing other conservatives who are now signing on, who have seen the conversation grow and are now interested in working with you, working with Dems on these types of reforms?
So, I try to approach this as a full court press across the entire criminal justice system. And sometimes I can pick up a partner like I have in Senator Johnson, a Republican, staunch Republican senator, on ban the box. Sometimes I can pick up a friend or ally like Mike Lee on reducing mandatory minimum. Sometimes I can pick up somebody on marijuana reform. And so there's a lot of field in the injustice within our criminal justice system, from arrests to the drug war to incarceration. And given the moral urgency of this, if you live in this space, I'm the only senator that lives in an inner city, low-income, minority community, and I see every single day the carnage, the daily carnage that the broken criminal justice system has. So I'm just looking for allies to pick them up anywhere possible, and I have seen movement. I mean, Chuck Grassley, when I got to the Senate in 2013, was on the Senate floor giving speeches against the very things that I was trying to do. One of the main reasons I ran for the United States Senate, and I've seen a coalition build between he and I. So again, I just look at history. The civil rights legislation didn't just pass because Strom Thurmond sat there and said, you know what, black folks should get some equal rights. No, it happened because a movement, a multiracial, gender, age movement happened in this country, and you saw people change their minds. And that's still why forums like this are important, by what was said in the last panel about using these incredible technological platforms to prick the consciousness of this country, because the real obstacle to change right now is not simply the people sitting in office. It's that so many Americans are vastly unaware of the things that are going on in their name. We see the state versus, or the people versus. We're the state, we're the people. These are horrible things. I sat down with a UN person yesterday discussing the human rights violations going on in the United States, not talking about other countries, but the daily human rights violations that are going on in our own country, again, in our name. And I have such a love for this country, and I always say, if this country hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. I love this country. I'm anguished by the ignorance of what's going on every day to millions of Americans. But I am knowledgeable that our country, when we can become aware, we react. And we've seen that from of '63 in Birmingham, when incredible protesters, children demonstrated, exposed the bigotry of Bull Connor and the systemic racism of the time. I could go through moments in history where once this country has its moral imagination expanded, its conscience pricked, goes from comfort to discomfort, that change is actually made. And that's what we really need in this movement at this point.
Right. I want to talk a little bit more about the administration. Do you
Sure.
see any partners there? I know my colleague Matt mentioned earlier, Jared Kushner has said that this is supposedly an area that he's interested in, mostly in reentry. Do you see a sincere effort at partnership there?
Look, I am a prisoner of hope, and Jared Kushner has reached out. I have a history. Kushner's and the Trumps. If you're from Jersey, you probably have bumped into them. But I will tell you this: Jared Kushner's father went to prison. I was a guy that was communicating with him while he was in prison. When he came out of prison, he was just animated because now he saw from the inside how broken the system is. The first time when I went to Rikers Island to meet with kids, when I was stunned and going around and talking to children incarcerated who hadn't even had a trial yet, kid after kid was telling me, I've been here 3 months, 5 months, 10 months, no trial even. The person that brought me to Rikers Island insisted I go was Jared Kushner's father, Charlie Kushner. So this is a family issue, and I know that there is a sincere intention there to make change. But again, I still do not believe we're going to make the kind of massive change we need unless the pressure is applied. And when you have Jeff Sessions, the most criminal justice reform, somebody who's brought to a halt the civil rights accountability, the voting rights accountability, the police accountability in the Justice Department, brought it to a virtual halt. Someone who blocked our legislation in the Senate in the last Congress before he was there, it gives me a pause to be sober about what can actually be achieved. So there's a lot of activity. My friends who are grassroots activists have been invited to the White House, who've had constructive meetings or constructive discussions. But James Baldwin said it very clearly. I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. And so my thing is, look, I don't have time to foist judgment or draw conclusions. I just, every single day for me, it's very painful to see what people are suffering. Every single day. I'm going to go to the floor of the Senate today and try to wake people up that I know Parkland is painful, and to see these young heroes on TV is so beautiful. But since Parkland, hundreds of Americans have been shot and killed in communities of color. I had a 10-year-old boy in Atlantic City. Where's his national headline? Why is his family not being interviewed? A young man killed in Newark. Where's his national? So the cost of inaction, the opposite of justice, is not justice. The opposite of injustice is inaction. It is apathy. It is ignorance. And that's the awakening that we need in this country. And to see each other's dignity, to see each other's beauty. And I'm guilty. I've made these mistakes in my life. Recently, as was said in the former panel, I'm running around the country talking about criminal justice reform. And the reason why I introduced the Dignity Act and the reason why I pulled Elizabeth Warren in to partner with me is because women were getting up in my face. Yeah. And literally saying to me, I still remember once we had Alicia Keys came in. It was one of these wonderful events of criminal justice in the Capitol. And this woman, after I give my speech, she brings me over. And this is what I love about a certain folk who they don't give a damn what my title is. She's up in my face, talking to me like my neighbors do still. And she's like, why do you never talk to the particular concerns of women in prison? And she started breaking it down for me. And finally, and I'm embarrassed to say this, I have visited prisons, many prisons, from immigration lockup in Texas to Rikers Island, but I never visited a women's facility. And when I went to this women's facility, first I met with many more women, formerly incarcerated women, and they were breaking down stuff. I was a United States Senator that I just did not know. Here I'm talking about ignorance, but I just did not know. Went up to and this gets me very emotional because when I went to go to the lockup in Danbury, Connecticut, the federal facility, I still remember this warden. She's this great leader, this warden of that prison, tough, talking to me. She had a swagger about her. And then I remember walking in, I asked her, how many women in this facility are survivors of sexual violence and trauma? And she stops and just looks soft and vulnerable in a courageous way. And she says to me, 95%. 95%. We are the society that takes the most harmed, the most hurt, the most victimized people, and our answer to their pain is to throw them into jails and prisons, and to compound their injustice. And so I remember we had a lot scheduled, and I just ended up sitting there at a cafeteria bench talking to these women, just using all my time. What did I need to visit the facilities? But just talking and listening to their everyday stories about having to make decisions between buying sanitary products and calling their children, who are often separated between 2 and 3 places. Hearing them with detail, how they're trying to make tampons, makeshift tampons in prison. I mean, that's outrageous and inhuman. And so we have a comeuppance. We cannot say that I'm a big believer that has this belief that before you tell me about your religion, first show it to me in how you treat other people. But there's a civic gospel that we all know. Just like when a little kid growing up in church, the songs we sang, we have our songs. We swear an oath. We swear an oath in this country on a routine basis that we'll be a nation of liberty and justice for all. And I'm sorry, we are so far from that when it comes to our criminal justice system and what we do to people. So I love the progress we're making, but even the bipartisan bill that we brought out of Congress last Congress was anemic compared to the concerns and the challenges we have.
Well, and that's my other question. So the bill that you brought out, it addressed some of the things that you just mentioned, sanitary products, being able to call home for free. What are the other needs of women that are not being met? And another thing that we see when we see all of this reform is that a lot of this is at the federal level, and federal prisons only have a small slice of inmates compared to local jails and prisons. So how are we
So just
addressing that?
to clarify, there was a comprehensive sentencing bill that made it out. The Dignity Act hasn't moved at all, but this is what has moved. So next thing you know, Elizabeth Warren, and by the way, you want a great, fierce partner, grab Elizabeth Warren. And I'm going on TV talking about tampons and pads, and just before we leave in 2017, to go on our summer recess, very quietly, the Bureau of Prisons puts out a directive that these products should be provided for free for all of our Bureau of Prisons. So sometimes you don't have to pass legislation, but calling out the injustice. Now, we still have the work to do. Again, Baldwin quote, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. We got to make sure that people are doing what the what the Bureau of Prisons said. But then the second thing that started happening, and this is because of grassroots activists. I don't want to credit Elizabeth and I, but so many activists around this country saw the quality of this bill, which addressed more needs for women, trauma-informed care, issues of understanding placement of women in relation to their children. As one, I call them survivor, as one child told me whose parents were incarcerated, when the mom goes to prison, the whole family goes to prison. And so our bill is very comprehensive, but then we start seeing 8 states now have picked up the Dignity Act or bills modeled after the Dignity Act and called the Dignity Act. 8 different states are moving, and that's important to me because at the end of the day, the federal government only has between 10 and 20% of the prisoners, but the states is where the prisons are. So to write a piece of legislation that now is being picked up in state legislators is a contribution I'm proud of, but just goes to show that this is a much larger movement and a much larger urgency because what we do on the federal level is important, but where a lot of this movement has to happen is on the state level.
Right. I want to let the audience know that we want to try and get 1 or 2 questions in after my next question for Senator Booker. So a lot of the pushback that we hear when it comes to sentencing reform is around community safety. Can you talk to me about how you respond to those concerns and also how de-incarceration and dealing with these issues helps community?
Well, first of all, if you're really concerned about community safety, before I talk about this whole false, often division between violent and non-violent criminals, but if you're really concerned about community safety, you wouldn't take a drug war and target communities. You wouldn't devastate them economically. You wouldn't rip parents away from children for doing things that 3 of the last 4 presidents admitted to doing. You wouldn't give lifetime sentences to individuals when they're coming out of prison for drug crimes, again, that many members of Congress have done, and then tell them for the rest of your life you can't get food stamps, you can't get public housing, business licenses, jobs. So devastating, and people are yelling out, there's 40,000 collateral consequences for people who have been incarcerated. What does that do to a community in terms of violence and safety when you take away hope from human beings for being able to provide for their families in already economically distressed communities? Remember, there's a study, I think it was Vanderbilt did, that we'd have 20% less poverty overall in America if we had incarceration rates the same as our industrial peers, because this is profound economic punishment. And so I will tell you right now that our criminal justice system has created more violence than it was trying to say that it was trying to solve. And what I mean by that is this system, the way it stands right now, by so economically disadvantaging certain communities, it has driven crime rates. And what we're seeing from some states, they're lowering, from most states, they're lowering their prison populations. You see crime going down as well. And again, if you treat people, if you deal with from everything from mental health to trauma, you will have a much longer term success in lowering crime than if you take people who have been traumatized, injured, hurt, addicted, and stick them in jails, further traumatize them with solitary confinement and other experiencing violence in prisons, and then release them. Hurt people are going to go on and hurt people. And that's the reality. And then just the last point about this false distinction, what we've created as violent crimes, having met people who've driven a car and didn't even know that a gun was being used, and that person's got a label of violent crime. And then the last thing I say about so-called violent criminals, as a guy who was in heavily testosterone-laden environments like football locker rooms where fights break out, one bar fight, one person tripping and falling, that is a violent felon. And to think that people who make mistakes don't have the capacity for redemption, I mean, this is something we've forgotten. Right. This idea that our whole society, in many ways, comes up from ideals of redemption, of second chances, of not being judged. Your whole life should not be defined on the lowest moment. And again, that's why I don't buy a lot of the arguments that are being used by people opposing reform.
And I think we have time for one very speedy question over there.
Hi, thank you so much for your leadership issue on this. I'm one of those people. I'm also the director of a transitional housing program for women in Virginia coming out of jail and prison. We're the largest one in Virginia, and we can only take 26 women at a time. It's just incredible. We're overwhelmed. We get an application every day. So women are out there in the system, and they need help, and they need leadership. And you're right to talk about the federal issues. For us, and these women are with me today that live in our home, in our program, they have terrible issues that are specifically to women. Thank you so much for taking the conversation today back to women. Women are not violent criminals. We hear people sit up there and talk about mass murders and all this, and these are not women's issues at all inside the jails. The issues that you're talking about, the feminine hygiene issues, the education, these women want to talk about how they can't get into classes, they can't get treatment, they can't see their kids.
Did you have a question? I'm so sorry to cut you off, but did you have a question around?
They had a question, and it was, how can they help us fix the issues, not at the federal level, but at the state levels? How can we do this work? How can we join you?
Right, and so we live in this distraught present where we are a society that is willing to do immoral things that are vastly more expensive than doing moral things that not only save money, but empower lives to go on to prosperity and success. And so, I've seen a lot of the realities where people are coming out of prison and have no place to go, have no support systems, and they go into homelessness, and it's vastly more expensive. And so I think that organizations like yours, who are, and we have them in Newark, the city in which I live, and these little islands of sanity and moral light that cast dark shadows over the way our society is doing things right now. Even I'm going out to Seattle this weekend to help some of my colleagues out there. And I love this one housing group called Plymouth Housing Group, where they just analyze small group of people they're serving relative to the need and the demand. And they just did an analysis of what's more expensive, keeping people with mental illness on streets and homeless, or putting them in supportive housing. As a guy who ran a city, supportive housing is expensive. And so they just did an analysis of 23 people on the streets or 23 people in supportive housing. They found that they were saving taxpayers in the city $1 million by taking folks off the streets. Why? Well, they end up in emergency rooms. But they also get churned into our criminal justice system, which is vastly more expensive for our society. And so when you start talking about women who are always the economic anchors of any society, any continent on the planet Earth, you empower women, you empower society. If you savagely, brutally attack women, you devastate communities, you devastate peoples. And this is what we are doing in this country. Again, I keep going to this Parkland thing that I so admire these children, I'm so inspired by them. But where's the conversation about domestic violence murders in this country, and how common it is, and how the stories I'm hearing about the numbers of people that are being murdered, but we're just not having the conversation about what is what is a reality for women on a daily basis in this country. And so the last point, Gwendolyn Brooks said it so eloquently, that we are each other's harvest, we are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond. And this sense where this is not a dog-eat-dog country. I love the ideals of rugged individualism and self-reliance, but rugged individualism didn't get us to the moon. Self-reliance didn't map the human genome. We are great when we recognize the essential nature we have to one another. And this society cannot thrive when it is casting such a large percentage of its people, millions of its people, into institutions that do more damage to their psyche, more damage to their economic well-being, more damage to their families and to their children. This is what we're doing. We are costing ourselves our treasure. And so the only way this is going to stop is if we create a movement and don't allow people who want to demagogue other people, who want to fear-monger other people. If we are at a point in our society where we are afraid of each other, we will never thrive in generations to come. This is still a young nation, still trying to make real on its promise, still trying to tell the truth to this world that a democracy that believes in freedom and equality, to me, these are the things that we are still trying to prove right over centuries. We're still a young country. And I just want to end with that ideal. Our founders, as imperfect as they were, genius documents, but they didn't refer to women at all. The Native Americans were referred to as savages in our Declaration of Independence. African Americans, fractions of human beings. But the one thing they understood, this being the oldest constitutional democracy, putting forth a country that's not founded because of the cords that had used to tie societies together. It's not a theocracy, it's not religion. It's not because we all look alike or speak alike. This was founded on these incredible ideals that we're still in the pursuit of. They ended that Declaration of Independence saying, if we're going to ever make it work as a country, we must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
And I think
this is what is needed right now. And so my call to action is this. My call to action is this. I will not get off the stage until I make a call to action. I will not yield my time. I'm used to a filibuster. My call to action is this. All the activists in this room, if we do the same thing we did last year, we cannot expect different results. We have to commit in this room, for all the people that won't listen to us, to be more rebellious, to be more unorthodox, to be more challenging to people, to take a stage or two, to let your voice be heard. There is too much sin in this country. We need to ascend in this generation above this tragedy that's in our country that's happening every day.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.